Thank you for coming to tonight's screening of My Friends, the Comedians. Please ensure that you have your cell phone silenced. Enjoy the show.
Hello, fellow joke enthusiasts, comedy connoisseurs, and champions of chuckle. Welcome back to the show. And if you're new here, my name is Jacob Marscola, and this is My Friends, the Comedians, a podcast where I sit down with a friend and discuss the mysterious, delirious, and unserious realm of comedy. Sitting across from me is a friend of mine who just so happens to be a comedian. Once again, a member of Ridiculum, and my second alumni on the show, a former president of the club who dealt with stand-up and improv. One of the silliest guys I know, one of the most noodle people I've seen. Welcome, Patrick Lyons.
Thank you for having me. I know people have already said this, but you've really got that intro thing down.
Thank you. I want to get to a point where maybe I've memorized it, but also I don't want to sacrifice an intro for memorization. I do love reading off of it, and it's really fun.
Looks pretty comfortable.
Yeah, I like it a lot. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
It's good to have you. It's good to be talking with you. For context, and the listeners know this, yesterday recorded Siobhan's, recording yours. In a few weeks, we'll be recording more alumni. It's fun to be getting to talk and have these conversations with people that I used to be in this club with.
Right.
It's really fun. So before we get to starting, I have an opening question.
Okay.
If your personality was a coffee table book, what would it be? For context, mine is a book about improv that I have yet to read, which is both parts of my personality and aspects of me. So if your personality was a real book on a coffee table, what would it be?
Right. I've been so excited for this question.
Awesome.
Actually, because I have a coffee table book. I actually do own one.
That you have on there for that reason.
I don't have my own coffee table just yet.
Mm-hmm.
I'm moving next weekend, so I will then. But I have this beautiful book that my sister got for me for Christmas as a joke a few years ago called Dogs and Chairs, Designer Pairs.
What?
And yeah, so it is... there's almost no words in the whole book. It's just on one page, there will be a funky looking designer chair.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other page, there will be a dog that kind of has the same appearance or energy as the chair.
Is it pretty good, pretty spot on?
Some of them are stretches, but most of them are pretty spot on.
That's awesome.
And I think it's just such a, who had that idea?
Yeah.
And I'd like to think that kind of encapsulates my personality a little bit.
It feels like if we did which we did at one point when you were still here, but in a presentation night, that feels like it could be a thing that you would do, like a PowerPoint. Right. Oh my gosh, I love that.
Yeah.
You said it was called what again?
Dogs and Chairs, Designer Pairs.
That's insane.
Yeah, I'll show it to you sometime.
That's really fun. I'm loving that it's being added. So in my mind, in the lore of this show, there's a coffee table that now has 5 books piled on top of it. 6 books, sorry. And so it's that being added to the pile is such a throw from the rest so far. I mean, they're not all the same, but we started with 100 sports facts with Owen. Now we're at Dogs and Chairs, Designer Pairs.
And where do we go from here?
I have no clue. That's a great entry. That's really fun.
I do like that one. I haven't looked at it in a minute. I need to revisit that sometime soon.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that. So you're here on the show to talk about your comedy journey and your relationship with comedy. Before we were driving over here, and I told you, I was like, this is maybe the most excited I've been to go deep in depth into the journey because, I mean, as Pat described it on the way here, you and I are very into lore of things.
Yes.
The lore of the world, especially people that we know, or your personal lore.
Right.
And I love talking about it with Pat because we have talked about it before and spent 2 hours. We're going to have to condense it to 1 hour this time, so I hate to tell you.
We'll have to keep ourselves in check here.
Absolutely. But no, it's... I'm really excited to get to it, especially because I'm excited in general to get to talking to different alumni too, because so far in the show it's been, even with Siobhan, who's an alumni, it's been people that I have seen your entire comedy journey, at least as far as I know. So it's really exciting to get to hear some stuff I've heard before, but stuff I was not there for. So take us through it. I'll interject where necessary. Where do we start with comedy? Not just Ridiculum. If there's anything that's before Ridiculum, where does comedy start for Patrick Lyons?
So my comedy journey actually does start prior to Ridiculum.
Awesome.
So when I want to say I was maybe 10 or 11 years old, I did a 1-week improv summer camp.
Whoa. That's cool.
Yeah, so that was my first like introduction into improv. I think it was my mom signed me and my sister up for it like entirely because she just wanted us to practice like public speaking, thinking on your feet, just like good important skills to have in or outside of comedy.
Definitely.
But you know, my family, we're a pretty silly, goofy bunch.
Yeah.
So I think we really did take that class to heart a little bit, and I never did any formal improv or comedy or anything again until college, but every now and then we would just like break out some of the improv games and just
cool.
like we were our own little improv troupe in a way.
Yeah, because like some improv games aren't even like, no, you need to be a performer to do this. It's like this would be at like a game night. Like this would be something that we just like with friends you would do. Like I've fully, since joining Ridiculum, especially in the early days, like there would be games that we would do that are a little more gimmicky and less like scene based. And I would go to my friends like, you guys want to do improv, but like not really. It's just like a fun game. And we would do it, and they were like, that was fun. That's what you do every week, twice a week.
Totally.
Like, kind of. Basically, that's it.
Yeah.
No, I love that though. I love I'm definitely like the thing of like, oh, you know, parents that are like, I'm gonna force you to do sport, like the dad that's like, you're gonna play football. Like for me it's gonna be, hey kids, you're gonna do improv classes,
right,
even if it's just for your own social development.
Yeah, I think there's so much good that can be taken out of just a 1 week improv class.
Yeah,
even if you're not like trying to be any sort of comedian or do any sort of comedy in the future, just as far as like being comfortable public speaking, being comfortable coming up with something on the spot, reacting to unexpected events, or just like getting out of your shell a little bit. Like I was definitely a shyer, quieter kid, and I don't think that's necessarily completely changed as I've gotten older and done more comedy, but I think it's definitely helped me come out of my shell a lot, because you kind of, if you're doing improv comedy, even if it's in like a small setting, you kind of have to be out there a little bit.
No, definitely. I love that that's the start for you. Take us to the rest through it. How much of a gap between that, or does more start to happen? Are you like kind of taking in like improv or like comedy content until you get to school? What's up?
So there were little bits and pieces sprinkled throughout. So I'd often play like bus stop with my siblings, and so that, you know, like we're not doing real scenes there. We're just, you know, being goofy little characters, sometimes making it connect, sometimes not. And then I had a job in high school at my local zoo, and I swear this is going somewhere.
Yeah. This is a comedy podcast?
Yeah.
Not a zoology podcast.
Yeah.
Well, I know you're really into animals.
You know, I don't think they're necessarily mutually exclusive.
The best comedians are those that can't speak English or words at all.
Exactly. The best comedians in my experience are donkeys.
Oh, wow.
Anyways, so in this job, it was like a high school job program. So we were all instructed to kind of make presentations about what we do in our day-to-day in our different departments that we were working in. And so I was in the education department, which is not as like cool and flashy as all the animal care departments. We're like, how can we make our presentation a little more fun and interesting?
Oh, hell yeah.
And so we decided we're actually not going to make like a PowerPoint. We're going to make a video, and it's going to be an Office parody.
Oh, fun.
And so that was my first time like doing any sort of like silly sketch writing.
Like intentionally being funny.
Exactly. And it was a hit amongst the education staff at the zoo, so it hit its target audience.
Wow, that's really fun. What was the character that you replaced in this film? Or was it not entirely one-to-one?
It wasn't entirely one-to-one, but I will say there was some solid foreshadowing because I was quite prevalent in the acting and writing.
Uh-huh.
So I was all over the place. I was mostly a Dwight-type character, which I don't think is entirely a surprise.
That's not your personality, but you could play a Dwight.
I think so, too. It's not who I am as a person, but it's often the direction my characters go in.
And, you know, glasses.
That's a big part of it.
It's really
a massive part of it.
So who has glasses? Pat has glasses. Pat, can you play Dwight?
Yeah, and, you know, I feel like I can pull off an oddball like Dwight when I really put my mind to it.
Definitely.
I also gymmed for some scenes.
You could gym, too, for sure.
You know, I like to try to be versatile, kind of hit both ends of the spectrum there.
The only character I can't see you, or at least like the prominent ones, I can't see you like naturally going into a Michael Scott.
Yeah.
I think you could definitely pull it off.
If I committed myself to it and practiced, I'm sure I could be passable in that space.
But I don't think that's like a natural you.
It's not a natural fit for me, and so we had someone else doing the Michael Scott role, so it all worked out.
Awesome.
But
that's really fun. So you do this like office sketch, and it does making it all of a sudden you're like, oh, I liked that people laughed at it. I liked that people were entertained in general by it.
There was definitely a little bit of that in there, at least. So it was like in the back of my mind. Then as I was going off to college, this is like 2 years later, no, like a year later at this point, I knew I wanted to get involved somewhere or another because I was like, well, I'm going to have to make friends, I guess.
Yeah, the friends thing is like, I have to survive. I need people.
And so my mom had just kind of said like, oh, maybe you should join an improv group. Like just offhandedly, she's like, you're good with voices and accents. I think you could be good at it, whatever. And so that was like present in my headspace as I was going to the involvement fair. And I was like, well, I don't know if I want to do that, but it's an option. Mm-hmm. So I go to the involvement fair my freshman year. I'm like 2 weeks into college. I don't know anything. I'm scared. And I'm just like doing laps, and I see the table for Ridiculum, and I don't walk up to it.
Nope.
And then,
and that's the end of the podcast.
And that's it. I never actually did comedy. This is a prank. This is a bit.
This is a bit. This is Pat, my math friend.
Yeah, this is actually my first act of comedy.
Yeah, he's never really laughed. He's kind of getting used to it.
Yeah, it still feels weird, but
But imagine in a future where you did eventually go back. What does that look like?
Hypothetically, I made my first lap around the involvement fair, and I was like, I don't know if I signed up for enough stuff. I don't know if I found a group that feels like it's going to fit yet.
Uh-huh.
And so then I worked up the courage to walk up to the Ridiculum table. And if my memory serves me correctly here, Andrew was there, Jay was there, and Tim Kroll, who I don't think you've met, was there.
I don't know if I've met Tim yet. Yeah.
Tim's great.
I've heard good things about Tim.
Yeah. And so... again, this is all me just trying to piece together who was there. So I believe I walked up and immediately got hit with Andrew saying, "Who's your favorite comedian?" And I was like, because I didn't have an answer off the top of my head. So I just went with John Mulaney, which is the default.
But like that's insane and weird. But now from someone who has the perspective of like just desperately trying to get people to come to the table, which you know of, that makes sense.
It makes sense.
Sometimes you're just like, I'm going to say a thing and hope it works. Like you try everything and you try to do different energies or whatever.
Right.
I fully did that this year for sure. Yeah. I was like, well, who's your favorite comedian? Or like, you're funny.
And
like,
I mean, clearly it worked.
It worked for sure.
But then I got, positive reinforcement by like Jay or Tim being like, yeah, he's good. And I'm like, oh, okay, that was a good answer.
Yeah, it was a good answer.
I got a good grade at improv.
If you had said like a certain comedian, they're like, nope.
Yeah, you got to go.
You got to go. You can't. We don't do Ron White here. No. You got to get out of here.
But then I, threw my name down on the list, didn't really think about it, got an email a couple days later about the first practice on Sunday, and I was like, I don't think I'm going to go.
And then this is where the hypothetical stops, and you didn't go anymore.
Yep.
But in a hypothetical...
but in a hypothetical where I did.
Let's see what happens next.
That it was just like a lazy Sunday. I think it was maybe Labor Day weekend, so it was a long weekend. I wasn't up to much. And I was like, well, I might as well. Like, there's no harm in just showing up to the practice, right?
Yeah.
And so
did you go in with like I might not even come back another time?
Absolutely.
Oh, for sure.
I went just to see what it was about, planning on just observing, and because it's weird to think back on it now, but I hadn't done improv in like a decade at this point.
Yeah, that's
weird. It was just not in my routine.
Because it wasn't like, oh, I'm hesitant to do it because improv's weird. I don't know about that. Like you have an idea of what it was. So was it more of a fear of like, well, I won't be as good as I should be from someone who's done it before?
It was definitely a little bit of that, and part of it was definitely just me being a freshman, not quite having found my place on campus yet. So I was a little hesitant going into any kind of new environment like that.
Definitely, yeah.
But the tension was eased immediately because I walk in and I am wearing the exact same Villanova shirt as Jay.
Which is always fun.
And it wasn't like one of the big ones you see around. It was just a random one that I'd gotten at the bookstore, and Jay happened to be wearing the exact same one. And we were like, oh, that's funny. Where are you from? And I'm like, Boston. And he's like, huh, me too. So that immediately just gave me a sense of like, okay,
Thank God.
this is, I see someone who I can recognize. Oh, you're the president?
Oh, interesting. And you're like, that's what a coincidence. I'm going to be president
Like,
too.
me too.
I'm going to be the president at some point. Yeah.
So yeah, once that kind of all happened, I was like, okay, I'll hear him out. There's pizza.
The pizza was honestly, I was excited for it with my first practice, but like the pizza being there, I was like, okay, I haven't eaten. I'm new to college and I'm being unhealthy with my food choices. I should eat this food that's free.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And then I actually, for some ungodly reason, got up and did a scene in my first practice.
Oh, in the first one.
It was a bell curve, and I came in at 5.
Ooh, that's tough. Did it go well?
It is, but it isn't.
Uh-huh.
Because it's actually funny. So my first scene, I really liked the concept for the scene. I did stuck in an elevator, which is fun until you realize there's no way out.
There's no way to get out unless you're unstuck.
And the whole thing about a bell curve is you have to leave.
Mm-hmm. Especially like you don't have time to think about it too. You have to leave the soonest.
Exactly. I jumped in being like, oh, this is funny. People are in a good position for this. And then a minute in, I was like, how do I get out?
Yeah.
And eventually, my older kid scene partners had my back. They threw me out of the elevator,
just kicked
being
you
like,
out.
we got to drop weight.
Mm-hmm.
And so that I appreciated that. But I think getting in a scene definitely made me feel like, okay, you know what? I think I might stick around. I think I might keep coming back. And so then the first Wednesday practice came around, and I did not go.
And this is where the hypothetical
hypothetical ends.
And then he didn't go anymore.
But hypothetically, if I were to come back that Sunday.
When did you do that? Was it the next Sunday you came?
Yeah. So my thing was like, I don't know if I want to be all in on this right now. So I'll go to the Sunday practices. And then I had a lot of fun at the Sunday practice, even though I wasn't participating in games. Like I was just kind of there to watch, there to learn. And then after that practice, I was like, well, why didn't I want to be all in on this? Because this is really fun, and these people are really cool and nice.
Yeah, I talked to Siobhan about this yesterday. Was it that second practice that solidified? Because Siobhan was like, I came into Ridiculum knowing like I have bad commitment issues or something like that, and it was like and she was like, I'm not going to be able to consistently come to practices. And then there was a moment where she was like, I have to consistently come. Is that second practice the one where you're like, well, I can't miss one now. I have to come. At least try it best I can.
I honestly think it was. I don't remember the moment where it clicked in, but I do remember looking back at the end of my freshman year, or March, when we got sent home because the world was ending, and being like,
I'm excited to talk about that again.
Yeah. But I got to the end of that year and I thought back on it. I was like, wow, I don't think I missed a practice after that first Wednesday.
Wow.
I think I went to every single practice that took place.
Man, that's really cool.
Because, I didn't have much else going on. But then I really found my people there. And
finding the people is consistently the message I've gotten from everyone I've interviewed so far. And same goes for me. Once you've found the people, it's like, well, I can't not go, and I'm staying here forever.
Exactly.
And I'm going to be incredibly sad when I have to leave. I'm excited to be here, and I'm never leaving ever.
Yeah, I owe so much to the kids who were older than me in Ridiculum when I joined, because they immediately made me feel like so welcome, and like I found my community and I found like friends.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was friends with Miguel at the beginning of freshman year.
That was like first connection.
He and I were in the same orientation group. We met like immediately and we hit it off and we clicked, and rest is history.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, I was like, a little concerned because I was, getting along great with my roommate, but he had his own friends and I didn't want to intrude on that. But then I found Ridiculum and I was like, oh my God, this is what I've been looking for. These people are so cool. They are inviting me to hang out with them. They want me to be there.
Yeah.
And that meant the world to little 18-year-old Pat.
Definitely. You mentioned Miguel, and it makes me remember you're the first guest I have that I can now connect to this, because I believe so far I haven't had, but like comedy doesn't just stay with Ridiculum.
Right.
There's other clubs that exist called VTV.
Yes.
Where entertainment sketches, like doing comedy stuff like that, the kind of thing that you did like at your zoo job started to come into play. Let's shift over to that for a second.
Sure.
Joining that, when did that occur? Like what does that look, hypothetically, if you did?
Yeah. No, this one I did do.
Yeah, this one, we're going to say this one was actually real.
dropping the bit here because it's getting really hard to keep track of.
Absolutely. It's going to come up at some point, and one of us is going to bring it up, and we're going to go, oh, I forgot.
Yeah. None of this happened.
None of this
Anyways.
happened. Yeah, VTV,
So
tell me about that.
February of my freshman year. So Miguel and I, at the beginning of our freshman year, he joined VTV because he'd been really interested in media production stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I joined Ridiculum because I guess why not?
It does fit as much as you were both involved in both. That's who belongs to who the most.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. And it goes to show you ended up both leading each club.
Yeah, we were the presidents of each club, so
Definitely.
it makes sense.
Yeah.
Then after a couple weeks, we realized that we had made all the same friends just between the two clubs. Like, oh, you know Andrew? That's crazy. You know Grant? That's crazy. You know Jack? That's crazy. You know Allie? That's crazy. Because, so we had made all of the same friends, and we're like, all right, well, I guess we're just going to be kind of peripherally around these clubs now. 48-hour challenge rolls around, which for the uninitiated, it's basically you have 48 hours to write, film, and edit a short film. And
involving some sort of a prop and a line.
Involving a specific prop that has to be used in a specific line that has to be said. So Miguel asks me if I would like to be on his team for the 48-hour challenge. And I'm like, yeah, sure, that sounds fun. Because I was thinking a little bit back to my little zoo sketch, and I'm like, oh yeah, I could do something like that. And so he had recruited a couple of like the upperclassmen in VTV as actors, but he and I were going to do all the writing. So we were up on Friday night in my dorm room, and we were just trying to come up with something. And we are like, okay, let's think of a genre that we want to do, like a trope. And we landed on murder mystery. And then the ideas just started flowing and flowing and flowing. We were like, oh, what if the twist was that everybody except one person was in on the murder?
Yeah.
And that is how we created the masterpiece that is Spoons Out.
It's at least in the current, maybe modern circle of VTV, because VTV's existed for a while. It's the iconic one. It's the one, and it's because it has a ceiling tile. It's because it won a 48-hour challenge. Like and just because of like it's been perpetuated in terms of culture in VTV. Like people just keep talking about it. Like it's already been mentioned, so now it's another 4 years that it's going to exist in the minds of the VTV people. Yeah, it's iconic, but like, and it's I can't ever remember when I talk about Spoons Out if like I can't remember if I really like it just because it's ridiculous or if it's like, oh, I peace and love. It's not because it's like, oh, I don't know if it was like hilarious to me.
I don't think it was.
I think it's just because it's ridiculous.
It's just so strange.
Yeah.
So it's theoretically a parody of Knives Out. Neither of us had seen Knives Out before when we made this.
That's awesome. I wish you had, because then you probably would have made some sort of a Benoit Blanc character.
Part of me wishes we had. Part of me is glad we didn't, because I like that we just went completely off the rails with it.
But fully took like the IP of it, like the whole look of it.
Oh yeah, it looks all the same.
Absolutely.
In the
like the poster,
in the poster and everything.
Yeah.
There's no other similarities.
I love that. That's really great.
Yeah, it's such a fun little story of a group project working together. The lights go out, someone gets stabbed to death with a spoon.
Yeah.
And there's all these theoretical little hints, but they're not really hints. It's just kind of like justifications at the end for why everyone except one guy did it. And it's one of the stupidest things that I think I have ever made to date. And I'm so incredibly proud of it.
That's the criteria for 48 hour. I mean, I think people don't like I love a 48-hour challenge that has great production and like if it works and it wins. I think the previous one was like I liked it was pretty well produced and then it also won. I liked it a lot.
Yeah.
But the general vibe that especially if you're a judge of the 48-hour challenge, which gets figured out randomly or like you just choose, you should know that the criteria is what's the dumbest.
Yeah, it's like what did you have the most fun watching?
Yeah,
absolutely.
At the end of the day. Yeah, it's not as though like, oh, what's gonna win the Villy? It's like what was like it's because it's like this might be too dumb for the like sophisticated Villies judges, so maybe we'll give it the award of dumbest awesome thing we've ever seen.
Spoons Out, Plot Chickens.
Yeah,
those were never gonna win real awards.
No,
not even for a comedy category.
Because it was a specific vibe that like. The film professors and the like alumni that are like very into like aren't gonna, and it's no hate to them, they're just not supposed to do that. They're not supposed to award those films.
Exactly, like they're not technically well made, but they're fun.
They're fun, yeah, absolutely.
Which is why I was very humbled that Stick to the Plan actually managed to get an award at the Villies my senior year.
Absolutely.
That was a fun one to make.
That one was really fun. I've enjoyed the 48-hour challenges so much. Still debating if I'm going to have time to or want to make one this year, but I feel like I have to.
You made one?
I've made Hoyt and Tapper, and that's
right.
it.
Right.
And that was it. Freshman year,
You judged.
Freshman year, I judged
because you robbed us of winning.
I did. Writers' Room, and then
Writers' Room was great.
No, and then Writers' Room would later go on to get robbed at the Villies.
It would
for best comedy.
Which
is an insane story.
Blows my mind, but it's not.
It doesn't matter.
Neither here nor there. Not my episode to discuss it.
Yeah. No, and then sophomore year I did Hoyt and Tapper.
That was a great one.
Thank you. I had a lot of fun making that with Justin and Carm. And then I think last year I just got really busy.
Makes sense.
And so I just fully didn't participate at all, but I went to the screening. Maybe I'll do one this year.
Yeah.
But talking about you started to you were pretty involved in just entertainment, or did you kind of bounce around different departments?
So I didn't join officially until my sophomore year. But over quarantine, Miguel and I had written our series for entertainment that we eventually made a couple years later. Mm-hmm. So I went in being like, yep, I'm in entertainment. That's my department.
That's the thing.
But I was friends with all these different VTV people. So before long, I got pulled into all the different departments, Allie was just great at recruiting for internal that year when she was running it. So I got roped into internal, and I was helping out, with like promo and just making the club run and everything.
Yeah.
I got pulled, I joined news as sort of a means to an end because I had a project for a class that was like, a creative way to raise awareness about single-use plastics. It was a very specific thing.
Yeah.
But it was like a semester-long project. So I'm like, I'll make a VTV show about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had my little series, Sustainability on Campus, which is not remotely comedy-related, but it got me into the news department.
It got you there.
I talked about like plastic spoons and masks and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Riveting.
You know what? This is exactly what we need on the comedy podcast.
Yeah.
I love it. That's great.
No, let's delve more into single-use plastics.
I'd love to hear about it, and I'm sure you could talk about it for a little bit.
I could, but I think for the good of the podcast, I'll choose not to.
Choose not to.
It took me a little longer to break into the sports department, which is odd because I'm like a huge sports nerd. I just never really got around to it. But I did do the sports game show my sophomore year.
Cool.
So I got involved in that sense.
I didn't know we had a sports game show.
It only ran one season, I think, but I won the whole thing.
Cool. I'm a big fan of unearthing old VTV projects and bringing them back. Maybe I'll do that this year.
Yeah.
I love doing that. I love being like, have you guys seen this? They're like, no, it's got 5 views. It should have 5,000.
Yeah, there are some gems if you delve far
There's some
enough
gems
onto
that
the
don't
channel.
have the attention that they should have. Yeah, absolutely.
The spicy chicken taste test should have been way bigger.
Absolutely, man. Can we just real quick talk about how I was gonna be involved in the video, and then
You got lost?
I got lost and scared to ask for help, and then later that night I went to the exact same place, but for a party,
right?
And that was insane.
Well, I was the opposite of that because you got lost. I wasn't planning on being in that video.
I think,
neither Lexi nor I were planning on being taste testers in that video.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you were trying to get you were gonna get people to, like, I don't know if they want to be in front of the camera.
Yeah, I wanted new people in front of the camera because the previous year's entertainment content had leaned really heavily on me being in front of the camera, which obviously I have no problem with. I love the attention.
Of course.
But
you know what? The VTV needed Earth Day and all of that, and ABC. And
thank you.
Yeah.
I agree.
Not ABC, A to Z.
A to Z. Same thing.
ABC is a different video.
But yeah, I was there to like stop by, show face.
Mm-hmm.
I was the assistant entertainment director, so I wanted to just make sure I was present at the first shoot.
Yeah.
And then luckily I hadn't eaten lunch, so I was hungry.
I hadn't eaten lunch. I wanna this is gonna start getting complicated when I start talking to people that are like really involved in both of these clubs, because now let's pause on VTV. Let's go back to Ridiculum.
I know, yeah.
It's such a weird, like, it's also so hard to talk about. In general, I know it's hard to talk about like the college experience that I've had when it's like these two not polarizing, but like these two big entities exist for my life. It's
totally.
VTV and Ridiculum. And even though there is cross and intersection, like they have their own moments. So you have to like go back and forth and talk about it.
Absolutely.
I want to hear about your first Ridiculum show.
Yes.
I want to talk, just like tell me a little bit about it.
Yeah. So my first show, it was what was the name? It was Spit Take.
The Spit Take.
Which is an awesome name for a show. Unfortunately, it was nowhere near Spit.
Yeah.
It was at the St. Mary's Theater, which I
Mhm.
love that venue. I wish we could have used that later into
Yeah.
college, but I understand,
It's no longer. I've
no longer
fought.
used for performances, but I understand.
Yeah.
So my first scene ever was a commercial with Chris Whitty,
Mhm.
who was a great person to have as a scene partner because he was, as experienced as anyone in the club and just a very steady presence to go next to. In my first scene ever on stage, I played a pregnant woman.
And that set the stage
And that,
for the rest of the experience.
it really helped me up because I figured if I can do that, I can kind of do whatever on stage.
If I can be a pregnant woman, two things of which I'm not,
Right.
I can be other things that I'm not.
Exactly. So it was like an ultrasound scene. The product that we had to sell was Windex, and so they couldn't tell if it was a boy or a girl because the screen was smudged. So luckily, I had never go anywhere without my handy dandy bottle of Windex, and we cleaned it off. And we weren't quite sure how to end it, and so then I just really had a moment of like clarity, and I just yelled out, "It's a boy!"
Yeah.
And that was my first scene, and that went so well.
That's awesome. That's a great button. I love that.
Candidly, the other two scenes that I had in that show
You're not a big fan
did
of
not
them.
go very well.
You're not a big fan of those, no.
I was in Two Line as one of the people who just has the limited lines they can say. So that's a good place to put
Yes.
an inexperienced person who you want to have out on stage.
Definitely.
Because I think, the exec at the time saw potential in me, but I wasn't quite 100% there yet.
Who's your unrestricted?
It was Claire Reckner.
Awesome.
And she did as good of a job as she could have done, but we got some bad, very specific lines, so there just wasn't much to work off of. I think, if I remember correctly, my lines were, "Honey, I Shrunk the Kids," and "Every Kiss Begins with K." And those are fun lines.
Those are great.
If you have one or the other and then something broader.
Those are great for like a line in my pocket.
Exactly.
Like a one-off, and then we don't hear it ever again.
So they're fun lines to take because the audience is going to be excited to see how you use them. That was my second ever scene on stage. I think I had done Two Line once or twice before. I had no idea how to use these lines.
Yeah.
So I think I just kept saying "Honey, I Shrunk the Kids" over and over and never said the other one because how does it come up?
Yeah. It's tough with Two Line. I feel like because Two Line is a thing, and we need to get to. I haven't touched Two Line in a while. We need to get back to doing that.
I think
in
it
the
might
club.
be the hardest game we do.
It's really hard because I think you either have to be really skilled at using a line, or you have to be able to accept the fact that it's not going to make sense, and so your physicality or your delivery has to be what like kind of brings everything. Because like if you get bad lines from the audience, like you can't just not say the lines.
Exactly.
Like you have to do it. You have to serve the audience for what they've given you for, despite whatever they've given you, and like you have to do something with the lines. And like so that's why I agree. It's like one of the hardest, maybe the hardest game because you have to be so. I mean, like unrestricted is equally as difficult, but depending on the line, restricted can be just as hard.
Yeah, I think they're very difficult in different ways, which makes it such a cool game when it works, but such a scary one because it might not.
Yeah, it's really a hit or miss, which is a lot of improv games are.
I guess that's kind of by nature.
It's kind of by nature for sure. So yeah, did you have what was the feeling after the first show? Like where you were like, oh, this is awesome. Like
I was pumped.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like looking back on it, I'm like, well, that scene could have been a lot better. And like I had a bell curve that was like fine, but not great. So it's like, with hindsight and having improved a lot at improv over my 4 years of doing it, I can recognize like that wasn't my best show by any means, but in the moment I was pumped. I had people coming up to me telling me how funny they thought I was, my friends who had been there, like people's parents who were there.
I know, yeah.
And so that was just an absolutely electric feeling. And that's really when I felt like the community of improv, just the trust that you have in your scene partners and the other members of the group, just everyone had each other's back so much. And that was just such a cool, exciting feeling to be kind of part of a team,
Yeah, the team aspect of it is great. A motto of Ridiculum is "I got your back," and that's legitimately such a thing that you feel like the moment you do your first show. At least I'd like to hope that people feel it. I'd love for people to feel it when this next show coming up with new people. That's like the thing we try to hammer home of like, improv needs to be team, like, or it's not going to work.
Yeah, that's the only way it works.
The only way it works, unless it's like a one-man improv show, in which case, have fun. That sounds horrifying.
That sounds so scary.
It sounds so scary. I'm glad you can do that, but I cannot, never, ever, ever.
No, thank you.
No, thank you. I'm good. That sounds horrible. Can you, real quick, because I don't know what the scope of it's like, when did you start, when was your first stand-up show? Because I know it sort of relates to your zoo job as well.
So I went to my first stand-up meeting. It was the first stand-up meeting of my sophomore year. So I wasn't involved freshman year in stand-up because that's just never something I saw myself doing.
The branch existed at this point, right?
It had just been kind of built out with like Andrew and Jill and Jack. But I was going into my sophomore year, newly on the exec board, which is a very exciting thing for me. And I'm like, oh, well, I'm on exec. I have to go to all the meetings.
I got to go to everything.
And
that's the rule.
And so I showed up to stand-up. And then I realized that wasn't a rule, but now I was just in stand-up. So I'm like, well, I'm already here.
They don't tell you it's a rule so that you're roped in and that you can't leave.
Exactly. And I felt bad not coming back. So I'm like, well, I guess I do stand-up now. And so I was like, I haven't been thinking about this. I don't have like classic bit ideas, but the one thing that I feel like I can riff on for a bit is the fact that I worked in a zoo in high school. That's weird.
No one does that really.
I have some stories from there. And so with a lot of help from Andrew and Tim and Brandon and all the people who were in stand-up at the time, I was able to workshop an unnecessarily long bit about working at the zoo.
Yeah.
And that was my first show. It was November, or maybe October, November, somewhere in that range of my sophomore year. And we had a huge crowd for that show because it was COVID. There was nothing to do. The show was free.
It was outside
at the Oreo.
Yeah.
So like people probably just stopped by when they were walking through. It went like really well for me.
Yeah.
And I wasn't expecting it to, just because I absolutely did not see myself as a stand-up guy whatsoever.
Yeah. I love Pat. He's not a very stand-up guy.
No, I'm a bad person.
He's a bad person.
I am an evil man.
He's an evil person. He studied sustainability simply so he could take it down from the inside.
Yeah, exactly. Someone who gets me.
I understand it. That's awesome that it went really. I mean, as the person that was known famously for his like first year in Ridiculum, of the psycho that watches all the Ridiculum videos.
Yep.
The guy there's like, oh, and like you guys would reference Spit Take, and I would go, oh yeah. And you would be like, you weren't. No, I've watched it though.
Yeah.
You've watched it? I've watched all of them.
Yeah.
But like I've watched that set. It's a fun set. I love it. I love it a lot. I love storytelling stand up because I think that's the easiest way to get into telling the joke, because everyone tells stories. Everyone talks about themselves.
That's what I have found is I do not feel nearly as comfortable doing stand up as I do doing improv, which is funny because stand up is like so much more structured, but I feel almost more comfortable in the lack of structure of improv.
Definitely.
In stand-up, I don't know if this is like a consistent thing with everyone who does stand-up, but I really feel the pressure of this has to be funny or I did a bad job.
No, definitely. I mean that's like, I mean, both valid reasons of like why stand up shouldn't be as pressure, but also it should be have like a lot of pressure because you have this responsibility to the audience of like, I've written this thing and edited it so many times.
Exactly.
You should laugh at this, which is why I think stuff like heckling happens more at comedy or stand up comedy shows, because it's like, if this isn't good, you've done a bad job. Whereas like improv comedy, as far as like, at least from the like thinking about like venues we've performed at that are not in Villanova, a little more accepting, because it's like we all know that they're doing this on the spot.
Exactly. And I think the goalposts are a little different for improv than stand-up, because us doing improv, we can recognize if we think a scene went poorly. For the audience, though, I think a lot of the time the fact that we came up with something to work off with that prompt is really impressive. Yeah,
just that in general. Like some improv games that we do, like I'm thinking of there's a game that we started doing that Justin and Noel saw from Comedy Sports. I don't think we did when you were in the club, but it was called Spelling Bee. And it's just like word after word or letter after letter spelling a word, and maybe we get it wrong. And there's no intentional comedy in that. It's legitimately just trying to spell a word right and then making a one word after word. Everyone gets one word sentence, like one after the other.
Interesting.
And it's very the fun part of it is the fact that it's gimmicky, and they're like, they did that. They just started doing that. Like it's the fun thing of like, well, they're just doing it, and it's the gimmicky stuff is like very fun because the audience will laugh, not necessarily because it's always funny, but because it's insane that you did that.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's where a lot of it comes from. No, I agree. I think and the same goes for me. Like I'm at this point I don't care. Like even if I went up and bombed and did stand up in this bubble of area, I don't know if I could go to an open mic in like Philly.
I feel the same.
Yeah, but like I could go bomb right now at our regular Villanova audience, and be like, okay, well I've done this so many times.
Yeah.
I still don't like stand up as much as improv, but whatever. I feel more personally hurt if in an improv scene or a choice in an improv scene is not as like laughed at because I'm more connected to improv.
Totally. Like I have absolutely had stand-up sets where, like, I don't know if I ever fully bombed, but, like, I had some stand-up sets that I didn't get a ton of laughs. And I'm like, whatever. I really did stand-up because I went out and I liked it. I thought it was kind of fun. I liked the sort of being on stage, having the spotlight a little bit. But improv was more my passion, I would say.
Definitely. Moving a little later into when you're in Ridiculum or VTV, I guess not just specifically like my class, because that's the perspective that I'd be curious to hear about, but like starting to see new people come in. What is that? Because like you initially come in, it's weird to be on the other side of that fence, to be like, oh, like I'm noticing this with this people, or like, oh, this person's a little better than I thought someone new to improv would be. What's that like, seeing people come in? What was that like?
Yeah, it was so interesting because my first year as kind of like, on exec and experienced member was the year immediately following quarantine. So we couldn't really recruit that year. Our only new member that year was Miguel, who joined because he was already friends with half the club. So I didn't have really context for a new person joining until your class came in my junior year. And it was really interesting being on the other side of it because I guess at that point I just hadn't really seen anyone other than myself do improv for the first time. I'm realizing now every alumni that's like within the people that I knew in the club, it's going to be so interesting to hear about. Okay, so about when COVID came around, what was that? Like that. That's very interesting that like you had a good block of time where you're like, well, this is the club. No one else knew was coming in. This is the group that we are. And I will say that year was we didn't really get to do many shows that year, obviously, because it was impossible to book anything during COVID. That year, like the 2020, 2021 year following quarantine, in practice was, I think, some of the best comedy I have ever witnessed, Ridiculum or otherwise.
Awesome.
Like,
interesting.
That specific group of people, we were really consistently coming to practice. There were like 8 to 10 of us total. That was the size of the club that year. And we were coming in so consistently because there was nothing else to do that we were just so insanely synced and locked in with each other that like it's like we were one person being 3 people in a scene that year. Like we just clicked so well that seemingly every scene we did worked. And like we did a lot of long form that year because there were only so many people around, we could do it. So we did like town every practice that year. And
that's also, it's a good thing to think about because like, I think whenever right now we think of like, oh, we should work on long form, we think about the opportunity cost of, well, that means we're not working on short form. We have shows coming up. Y'all didn't have shows coming up.
We didn't have shows coming up. We didn't have anything specific to practice for, and no one was new.
So what should we work on?
We could just experiment. We could do whatever we wanted. There would be days where it would be like 2 or 3, like 3 or 4 people would show up, and that would be it. And we're like, okay, let's hang out and talk for 15 minutes, do an hour of Middleditch and Schwartz type stuff, and then call it there.
Yeah.
And just I prefer having new people come into the club and, just for the sake of the club living on and expanding and seeing all these new people do incredible things and grow so much as people and as comedians. But I love that we did have that 1 year of kind of,
this is the group.
Not stagnation, but consistency.
Yeah, definitely.
Where we could just work on things and try different things out and form really, really good chemistry with each other.
I mean, that's you sort of got like in like kind of an isolated period of time, the experience that like regular professional improv troops that pretty much stay together for their entire existence have. Like these people who like, oh, we're going to keep going doing shows, but like they just experiment with each other. They rarely ever recruit new because they're like, this is the group. We know ourselves best. This is the performers. Y'all got to feel that for a minute, and it wasn't this cyclical thing for a little bit.
Yeah. That being said, the next year having new people come in was so unbelievably exciting because for me, I just hadn't had that experience of being the older kid in the club and welcoming new people in. And, I remember you and Owen were like the first people to show up, the first new people to show up.
Super eager.
Obviously.
So eager.
It was, it was really exciting to see, to tell the truth. Just seeing these new kids who were so excited to be in this place that I had grown to love so much. And I was just so ready to, kind of pass that on and show you guys what makes it so special. And then we kind of just kept gaining momentum, kept getting more and more people who seemed genuinely really excited. We had, people jumping over from VTV. We had people being brought in by friends. Like even Siobhan came in that year. Like she's my age, but she didn't join until junior year, just, based on circumstances.
Yeah.
And that year was such a pivotal year for the club. Like it ushered in the whole next generation past when like myself, Siobhan, Miguel, Coletti were all going to graduate.
Yeah. I think I forget like, so there exists in Ridiculum something called Ridiculore, and it's like we chronicle the history of our club basically.
Yeah.
And obviously being the lore addicts that we are, Pat and I really love it. But I forget, but like that year, the fourth year, my first year, is titled something and I forget, but the whole theme of like, we're back, we're here, we're like kind of ramping up, like we're getting there.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I like hearing from older people, the second year of Ridiculum, around when you joined, was sort of the feeling. They were like, oh, I think we're starting to pick it back up, and then COVID like took it down.
It was brutal because we had been having a really great year up to that point. We had 2 shows that were fully our own on campus. We had performed at Comedy Sports. We had performed at University of Delaware. So we had done a bunch of different shows, and we were really looking forward to what the spring would hold. And then it just all got cut off really abruptly, which was really sad.
I can't, and I told Siobhan this too, I salute anyone who was in college, but specifically I salute Ridiculum people, because I love this thing so much. I can't imagine, like it still existed, but I can't imagine, especially because like everyone was in a state of mind when that happened where it was like, are we never going back? So it's like a thing of, are we just never doing this club anymore because we might not be able to because of restrictions? Like I felt heavy and like emotionally, and I was just in high school with like maybe friends I couldn't see.
Yeah.
A full bubble and circle of comedy that I can no longer tap into unless it's over Zoom playing Jackbox. That would suck, and I can't imagine how I would handle that.
Yeah. Well, I think what really worked with our group is that we had enough people who really, really cared about making sure that the spark didn't die,
Definitely.
that we didn't let it lose any steam. So we, as an exec board, I was meeting with Andrew and Jay and Becca and everyone over the summer just to make sure that we were ready to go for the year. We met immediately as a board, and we're like, okay, we are not okay with just waiting until the school gives us permission to do practice. We're going to figure out a way to do this. We're not allowed to book classrooms. Like, how do we do this?
Yeah.
And we threw out kind of as a joke, what if we practice in the parking garage? And so we were joking about it.
As a hypothetical.
As a hypothetical, genuinely, that was like a joke that we threw out.
Yeah.
And then we were getting a little further into the conversation. We were like, what if we did practice in the parking garage?
That's not stopping us. That's the safest way to do it, honestly.
Exactly. It was outside. If we go up to the top floor at night, no one's going to be there. And so we just sent out in the group me like, hey, we're going to practice this Wednesday, 7 p.m. on top of the SAC parking garage. And
I can't imagine that as a serious message being sent. I would look at it like if Owen was like, we're doing this, and I was like, that's what?
Yeah.
Wait, really?
But honestly, we loved it up there.
Yeah.
It became our place. Like as long as the weather was nice, we started doing practice in the SAC garage, and we stayed there for the whole fall until it got too cold. It was definitely a show of our perseverance, I think, at that time, because obviously we were far from the worst affected people by COVID. Mm-hmm. Not even close.
You know, it was such an oppressed community.
Exactly.
Ridiculum was.
Exactly. Ridiculum was incredibly oppressed at the time, but I think it was a testament to how special of a group it is that none of us were willing to let it just kind of sit on the shelf until we could go back to it. We were going to find a way to make it work, and we did. And, here we are God, 4 years later.
That's insane.
And Ridiculum's going just as strong as ever. So.
Yeah, and we go to the Sack Garage at the end of every year. We went to the bottom of it last year.
That's crazy.
Which was interesting. I think it was just because no one wanted to make the hike because I think
Fair enough,
we were
I
all
suppose.
tired. Yeah, it's I want to, man, I wish we had the 2 hours I talked about earlier because there's so much to get to. I want to talk about, I mean, I guess if there's anything, especially with getting up until your final year, that additionally you want to talk about with like VTV, like how that was going. I mean, you got to be the entertainment director. The same year you got to be the president of Ridiculum.
Yeah.
And did that feel pretty good? I mean, I had to imagine, like, if that had been like my scenario now, I'd be like, man, these two things that I love that I'm a part of both of them in this special way.
Yeah, it was really cool, very like special and humbling to reach both of those positions, because being president of Ridiculum was very special to me because of just how much the club had given me. Like that's where I found my friends. That's where I felt like I belonged. So the ability to go back and kind of be that older kid for the new people coming in, that meant the world to me. Mm-hmm. Additionally, being the VTV entertainment director, that was just like, it was a blast. Like, I don't know if it was as deeply meaningful as being Ridiculum president, but it was so much fun.
Dude, I think it's I love that because you mentioned, and you said here is like your first kind of moment of like intentionally funny for the purpose I'm going to make people laugh was like a video instead of just doing like improv. I'm sure it was like, oh, I understand this is like comedy, but it really was just for your own development to have fun. Like connecting back from all the way to like a weird Office Zoo video to being the entertainment director. And like, I love the stuff that we put out that year too. It was really fun, the stuff we were making. I was having a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, specifically my senior year, I think the crowning jewel of my VTV experience was, there are a couple I want to go to now. The big one is finally Miguel and I making Studs Undercover, which was the aforementioned show that Miguel and I had written during quarantine. So that's like 3 years ago by the time we're actually making it. So it was in the works for such a long time. And that was so special, having something that we had been envisioning for that long actually come to fruition and exist. Mm-hmm. Was so cool. Like, it had just been an image and a concept in my head since, I don't know, April of 2020. And then in May of 2023, all of a sudden episodes are coming out.
Yeah.
And it's
such
incredible
a good
development to see. And it had taken so many twists and turns. Our cast was so different from what we expected it to be. Mm-hmm. But I think it worked out for the best. I think we got an absolutely perfect cast, pulling from kind of random VTV people who had never been on camera before. We just liked their vibes.
It was, and people that I think we have never seen since on camera.
I don't think so.
JP, that might be his only involvement in a project, and he did great. And I loved it.
JP and Chamberlain. Yeah. So much respect for them.
I love it. I love that. I feel is their peak. Like that is their moment of shine.
I truly believe Chamberlain was made for the role of Ripclaw Striker.
Oh, for sure.
The moment that I basically offered that role to him was pretty funny because I was leading an entertainment meeting at the beginning of the year. I was talking about how I wanted to get Studs underway, and I just needed to figure out a couple of the last roles. And, I was just talking to the group in the front of the room, and my eyes just settle on Chamberlain. I'm like, have you acted before? And he goes, no. And I'm like, do you want to? Like, he just fit the vibe so well that I'm like, I've never seen this guy try to act. I don't know if he can read lines. I don't know if he can do any sort of voices or actions, but I just know in my gut that he's the right guy.
Is that the only project Chamberlain was ever? I have to imagine.
My knowledge.
I don't think he did, because he was sort of he was like I guess what we would call, but still fully part of V3, like a part-time member. He wasn't there all the time as involved, but when he was, it was really fun. But it was all production stuff. He would help out with like production.
Yeah, he was often behind the scenes.
Yeah, and so getting him in front of the camera, which I'm glad y'all did because it was so perfect. And then I think he did that, and he was like, "Cool, I've retired."
Pretty much.
That's my role.
That's basically what happened.
Because that was being filmed, and that was or was that his senior year as well? I forget. He was younger.
That was his junior year.
And then last year, I think we tried to get him in a lot of stuff. I think we might have gotten him in a few things.
He was definitely around last year. I remember him being in the 1,000 videos special.
Yes, he was. Yeah.
But yeah, he and JP also had just insane on-screen chemistry, which is awesome considering they had never met.
No, I love it. Was you would think that like, oh, you know, there's like older and younger member duos that have existed in VTV, and like that seemed like that was it, but they were not as involved as other people in VTV, and also had not really interacted.
They hadn't met. JP wasn't even. I think we cast him day of, because Justin was gonna be in that role, and then he got appendicitis the day we were filming.
Oh my gosh, man. That oh my yeah.
It's insane how things work sometimes.
It's insane how things work, and you know what? I think Justin would agree. We're glad that happened.
Hey, we got to name an improv show after it.
Yeah,
so
and that
all works out.
And that was a really fun show.
I'm sure it was. Honestly,
do you not remember? You start to get fuzzy a little bit.
It's not even like, oh, I've done so many shows I can't remember. I blacked out during most of my shows.
Me as well. Like I remember.
After my first show, I think I can probably count on one hand how many scenes I remember.
No, definitely. It's definitely like there's maybe a few shining scenes of like, oh, I remember this, but for the most part, like even though like it's not as though I forget all the praise after the shows, or it's not like, oh well, I've forgotten the whole show and I don't care what people said about it. But you're right. I black out. Like I definitely could go back and then watch the video and be like, oh yeah, I remember that.
I've never watched one of my shows before.
And I've watched every single one.
I know. We're just different. That's the one way in which we differ when it comes to lore.
Absolutely.
When it comes to the shows themselves, I'm just going to remember what I remember.
No, Pat likes to go by the memory of his own mind, and
exactly.
I'm like, I need to get this exact. I've been like writing little details in like Ridiculum, and I will go back to a video and be like, what's a cool scene that happened in the show, so that I can write down what happened, because I don't remember it, but I need to.
Yeah, I cannot watch myself do comedy. I don't know what it is.
Really? Yeah.
I can, but I would rather not.
I have a hard time watching myself doing stand-up.
I can watch my like scripted sketch stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Because that, I think I take a little more pride in the product that gets posted.
Definitely, yeah.
That was a nice alliteration.
That was nice. That was cool. The product that gets posted.
Exactly,
Yeah.
Really enunciate those P's and it's going to sound cool.
I'm Patrick Lyons.
Yeah.
Yeah. Patrick. I've been trying not to distract Pat because I've been pulling up my computer. I want to talk about your presidency.
Okay.
And Siobhan's vice presidency. While I'm trying to find it, like, can you talk about that? Like, what was that like? I mean, it's always fun to have like. I love hearing about the experiences. Like I love working with my vice president right now. Owen's great, and we work great together. What was that dynamic like? Because she talked about it when she was recording her episode. Everyone, including myself, was kind of like, Siobhan applied for an executive position?
Yeah.
Everyone was kind of like, wait, you're going to do it?
So I knew she was going to apply for a very, very long time. We walked back to West from a party at Andrew's apartment around Halloween.
Yes.
She'd been in the club for a month.
Yes.
And she was like, we're going to be presidents together. And I was like, okay, Siobhan, sure. Let's see how this plays out. But to her credit, from that point on, she got super, super involved in the club.
Yeah. The joke kept being like she was going to overthrow you, or the co-president's thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, I had a pretty good feeling going into exec applications that year that Siobhan was, in fact, going to be my vice president. Yeah. I expected it because I knew Kalechi had expressed interest in treasurer. I knew Miguel was not interested in being on exec in spite of his experience.
Yeah.
So that really only left Siobhan as an option. And I was curious to see how it was going to play out, honestly, because as much as I had become really, really close friends with her by that point, I hadn't seen her in like that sort of like responsibility role.
Yeah.
She was the most amazing vice president I ever could have asked for.
Yeah. She did so much more than I think that people expected.
She did so much behind the scenes that I think goes so unrecognized, because I think we worked so well as a duo because we're just, we're compatible people. We get along to begin with, but we also, her strengths are my weaknesses and her weaknesses are my strengths in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. So I was very focused when I was president about the community building of the club and the improv itself. Mm-hmm. Whereas Siobhan was very focused on the logistics. How do we get shows set up? How do we communicate with X, Y, and Z?
Definitely.
How do we, figure all this stuff out in time for the show to go off without a hitch?
It feels, with Owen and I right now, hearing about it, it feels flipped. And not as to say, especially with your duo or our duo, not as to say that like neither party does the either in any capacity, but like in a practice, Owen is very technical, very
Yeah.
much will say the first thing that makes sense for a scene, and like, and I do a lot of like, oh, we got to get a venue booked or something like that.
Exactly.
Just because like that was my experience as Julia's vice president, and so I'm
Totally.
like, I'm taking this over, and having Owen come on as my VP is like, you. In my opinion, as much as I really love improv, in my opinion, Owen is the person that I know that knows improv the most technically.
Yeah.
As much as I would love for that role to go to me, God, I would love to be the person that's like improv doctor. He's the improv doctor. Like he
just gets it.
He gets it so easily, which is crazy because like, and it's insane. It's insane that like he gets it so easily, and he's not someone that did it before college. It's
No.
it's not like he was like, I'm going into college knowing I know improv.
It just clicked with him.
It clicked really, really fast. And I remember when it clicked a little earlier for him, and I was like, I need to get that click because God, I want to do more like technically good scenes with him.
Yeah.
I bring up your and Siobhan's relationship as VP and president because she said something on the show last night. I need to find it. So Jacob, we're gonna cut until we get to it. Okay, we're gonna start a little bit before. I did find it, and we're gonna listen here. It's Siobhan kind of just talking about like the dynamic, and she was also like, please play this while you're doing his episode. So this is what we have.
So kind of got it by default, but I didn't make a play for Patrick's presidency. I talked about it, but I never actually made the play. And some misconceptions will say that I tried to overthrow him. I did not.
I would argue that you kept him in fear for his entire presidency, and that allowed you to make the decision.
Oh, yeah. No, like, and you're talking to Pat tomorrow, right?
Yeah, I'm talking to Pat tomorrow.
He's going to say the complete opposite. And, like, pull up this little audio clip for him. He lived in fear of me, and I ran that shit.
Pat, did you live in fear of Siobhan?
I always live in a little bit of fear of Siobhan, not in the Ridiculum context, just in the personal
In
context.
general, for sure.
I personally think we had a great working relationship. Neither one was running the club, and the other was just the second in command. That being said, I did fear for my safety because she lived around the corner from me
Definitely.
senior year. So it like at any moment she could strike.
Yeah, and she
So
could have, if she wanted to.
I did live in fear of her, just not in the context that I think she's suggesting. I think we had a great working relationship, and it was all love and rainbows, and it was just wonderful.
It was great. It was great to see, especially because, like, I mean, and I fully admitted this to Siobhan, and I've since said that I'm wrong. Like, the perspective of, even though, like, I was in the club as long as Siobhan, but she was a little older than me, but I was like, Siobhan, I think is doing good, and I just don't see her in an exec position. I absolutely see Pat as the president. So these two entities existing as, like working together, I wonder how this is going to go. And it surprised me. It really did.
Yeah.
More on Siobhan's side. I was expecting you to be able to run a comedy club.
You know, I'd been around that long. I hope I could do a good job at that point.
Absolutely. We are just about out of time.
I know. I wish we could go for longer.
Yeah, absolutely. Because like there's other people I've interviewed. It's like, oh, well, the story part doesn't go on as long, so then I shift to guess specific questions. But like, even if I had any, I think you answered them as you told your story.
Probably.
Yeah, because like, I mean, the thing I was really curious about was just like specifically the art of improv. What did that do for your college life and other aspects of it, and then specifically the art of stand-up? And you talked a lot about how, I mean, confidence in general. I mean, I feel like that you talked about how like that strengthened it, and like improv specifically talking about, I mean, if you want to talk about it for like briefly, we don't have a ton of time, but I was really curious as like specifically doing those things in college, and has it carried over in any way? Like,
Totally. Yeah. I mean, hey, if you want to just do a lore deep dive on another future episode, bring me back on.
you know what, we might, yeah.
But yeah,
We can talk about the what ifs for another episode, because you and I love talking about what ifs.
Seriously.
Absolutely.
so many little butterfly effect moments. But to keep it concise here, I think, like, you know, it really does go back to my mom signing me up for improv camp when I was in 5th grade, and like building up public speaking confidence and just a little more confidence to be myself and get out of my shell. Doing improv in college was so out of my comfort zone going into it.
Yeah.
I had not done anything live performance like ever. So it was completely out of my comfort zone. But doing that and doing it well and becoming comfortable in that space was huge for me. I could never have seen myself being the outgoing hosting type by my senior year, but I do feel like, partially just because of Miguel and I's positions in our various clubs, the social hubs of VTV and Ridiculum were kind of our apartment senior year.
Yeah.
And that, from just like a social confidence and comfortability level is the polar opposite from who I was as a freshman, where I would only go places when invited. I would never make plans with people.
Mm-hmm.
So just that development, I think, obviously part of that's just from getting older, but a huge part of that is from doing improv, and specifically doing improv in Ridiculum, and meeting the amazing people who brought me out of my shell.
Definitely. That's so great to hear. And it's great to, and I say that sounding like it's so great to hear. That's what I made the club for. No, but it's great to hear because it's like, regardless of if it's what people get out of the club in the future or hearing what people got out of it, the fact that I'm a part of and leading the thing that did this for multiple people is really cool in general. And I hope it continues to be this for people. And I hope people continue to because in general, in terms of like coming into college, and I'll leave this last note and then we'll wrap up. But in general, like finding the friends in the circle way more important than people let it on to be. Way more important than people like talk about. Like,
totally.
And I know that from the perspective of someone who thought that it wasn't that important at the beginning. As much as I joined Ridiculum and I was involved, I didn't really value it in the way that I do now, because I was like, it's just this thing that I go do, and then I go do homework, and then I go to sleep, or I stay up late and I make like bad like life choices. Like I didn't care as much about it, and then I realized like a little halfway through first semester, I was like, I need friends, like real, not just like my roommates' friends and people that so I was like, I need to do this, because like to survive college, you need the people. I will not accept the fact that there may exist someone that has gone through college having no friends and they're like happy or content. Like you have to do, and Ridiculum serves as a really good hub for that.
Yeah. Again, we're wrapping up, so I'll keep the story.
We're wrapping up.
But
an hour later, we're wrapping up, guys. Don't worry.
We really could go forever. This is dangerous.
This is really dangerous.
The first time I ever like hung out with people in college outside of Miguel and I being each other's only friends for like a month, was after the Ridiculum scavenger hunt at the beginning of my freshman year. I was walking back towards South. Chris Whitty, Jack Brenner, and Becca were walking towards Commons, and they were like, "Hey, do you want to come hang out with us?" And that for me was just like, oh my God, these really cool, nice older kids are asking me to go hang out with them. Yeah, I guess I will.
Yeah.
And that moment, I don't know if I've talked to any of them about that moment, but that moment literally transformed my college experience. That is the specific moment I can go back to when I knew that Ridiculum was my place and these people were my people.
That's awesome. And if it makes you feel any better, it's been perpetuated. I'm so familiar with the feeling. Yeah. And it's exactly the older people that existed when I came in. It was like, let's fucking go. I'm hanging out with people. It's such a good feeling. What a talk.
This is fun.
This was great. Absolutely. When I run out of friends to talk to, I'll bring you back on and we can talk about more. Thanks for coming on to the show. This was really cool. It was exactly as I expected. It was exactly as fun and as in-depth as I was expecting it to be.
Well, thank you for having me. I had a blast.
That's awesome.
It's always a treat to be able to talk to someone about Ridiculum, and particularly you, because we talk about it in the exact same way.
Absolutely. Yeah. I can't wait for later tonight when it's going to happen again.
Most likely.
Just not recorded. Yeah. Not for content.
Yeah. not for content. This is off the record.
This is off the record. But yeah, thank you to Pat for being on the show. I want to thank Andrew Mister for the use of this podcast theme song, Cruisin'. And my name is Jacob Marscola, reminding you to laugh, especially when it's funny.
Track of time now.